Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode.
Hello, my name is Marsha Aizumi, and I describe my mental health journey as an ongoing journey to not suppress my feelings, but regulate so I can live as long as possible.
And my name is Aiden Aizumi, and I describe my mental health journey as complicated.
Hello, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. Welcome to the first episode of this month of June. As you may or may not know, but I would assume you probably know, this is Pride Month. And with it being Pride Month, we wanted to bring on a special guest, two special guests actually, who, we really wanted to make sure that, there's intersectionality within mental health. With identity, of gender identity, cultural identity, and whatever it might be, there's so much intersectionality of mental health because as we touch on in this episode, mental health is really something we all experience on a day-to-day basis. You check in with yourself, you're feeling good or bad or sad or fatigued, whatever it might be for that day. Mental health has so much intersectionality. So with intersectionality in mind, we want to bring in Okaeri to discuss their program. So if you don't know what Okaeri is, I'll read it directly from their website. It's an opportunity to connect with LGBTQ plus Japanese/Japanese Americans and allies to find support, resources, and information, and learn how Nikkei have embraced their LGBTQ plus family members. So this was a great conversation with two of the, I wouldn't say leading, one of them's the founder of Okaeri, so I guess they're the leaders of the group. But it was really great to speak with them both, to hear about their journeys as family. It was a great conversation. But with all of that said, I'm so excited that you get to hear the conversation that I had with Marsha and Aiden Aizumi. Marsha and Aiden of Okaeri, thank you both so much for being on the podcast. I've met you both in a couple of different outreach events. Both amazing people, and then your program itself is amazing. But before I get into all of that and the backstory, I'd love to start by asking about why you described your mental health journeys as such. So, Marsha, I'd love to start by asking you about your mental health journey and why you described it as you did.
It's really interesting, Matthew, because, originally I thought mental health was like depression, bipolar, all of those things. So I wasn't sure I really had a mental health journey. But as I started to look into mental health more, I just realized that the way I think really does affect my physical health and the way I interact with the world. And I think being Japanese or Asian, we tend to suppress our feelings, right? And I've learned that when you do that, it comes out physically in other ways. So I'm trying not to suppress my feelings and understand them because I really do want to live as long as possible. And I realize that our mental health really does inform our overall health.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really well said, and I'm glad you acknowledged the fact that mental health isn't just this or that. It doesn't have to have a label. Everyone experiences mental health. It's something that everyone has. And then Aiden, complicated. You kept it short and sweet. I'd love to hear a quick overview about this short and sweet description.
Sure. Okay. It's short and sweet, but it's complicated.
Right.
So, I've been in, I think my sort of introduction into sort of dealing with mental health and my own mental health started really young. I struggled with a lot of anxiety like in my elementary school years. And so I feel like it wasn't something that I remember being talked about. And so I think I felt just really like isolated and alone. And of course, like at that point, I feel like there wasn't a lot of support that I felt like I could access as a, under 10 years old person. And not really understanding then how to like best support myself. And then of course I've been sort of in and out of, I think, seeing different therapists throughout my life now, dealing with depression, and also my anxiety for most of my life. And then just trying my best to learn ways to, support myself, to cope with my anxiety and depression, to be on and off medications. And so I feel like it's just all over the place. And at any given time, like, it changes for me. And so, I'm currently like not on medication, but I had stopped taking, antidepressants like right before the pandemic, like in 2019. And so I kind of had just gotten to the point where I was like, all right, I've been off them for a year and feeling good. And then the pandemic started and I started to kind of feel, not as steady and not as kind of grounded in my mental health. And so, kind of had to reevaluate again. And so right. I don't know, it's complicated.
Yeah, no, totally. And as you mentioned, you're able to put a label to it, but to combine both of what you both said, it's a constant checking in with yourself, because whether you have a way to describe it as depression or anxiety, regardless, it's something that we always have to check in with ourselves about. So I'm glad that you both acknowledged that. And I want to go back to the beginning and hear more about the backstory behind your program and your lives as humans. So Aiden, I would love to start by asking you, what was your upbringing like? And Marsha, I hope none of this comes off as an attack to you. I just want to ask Aiden about his perception of his upbringing.
Yes, no, I think in order to have a really good podcast and dialogue, we just really have to be open. And I want Aiden to do that as well. Good. I've made mistakes and I'm trying to be better. And I think that's also important for people to know. Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, for the most part, I feel like my upbringing, the normal's not the right word, because I don't even really know what that means. But it felt pretty ordinary and typical up and through sort of when I hit puberty. So growing up, I feel like, we did family trips, like kind of cook dinner together as a family, clean the house, we played golf. That was what my brother and I were raised to do. So sometimes weekends were like family golfing sort of days and things. And I don't remember my childhood being particularly, like, there wasn't something traumatic that happened that started me on this sort of mental health journey either. So I felt like I had support, like my parents were trying to help me as I kind of navigated that at a young age. And so it felt pretty just sort of ordinary. I don't know, not normal, but there wasn't something that stood out to me in my earlier years. And then as I got older and I hit puberty, that's where I think for me that struggle started. And for us as a family, there was a little bit of a sort of a rift that happened, and not because something specific, but just over time, as I was dealing with my own things as an adolescent, I started to just pull away from my family. And so there was obviously then like a lack of communication and us sort of engaging in the way that we used to. And so, we were doing less together because I was sort of not participating. And I don't know why, I guess I did those things, but I think I just was trying to sort it out on my own, sort of in a very teenage way. Mm-hmm. But I think that did then change sort of the trajectory of our relationship and dynamic as a family, because of, how I was trying to figure that out.
So, Marsha, does that all sound accurate so far?
Yes, it really does. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very accurate.
And Marsha, I'm going to get to my questions for you, but before that, Aiden, throughout your experiences prior to coming out, And specifically from your perspective, your point of view, what was the landscape like for the LGBTQ plus community? Were you aware there was a community? Like, did you know how to identify yourself? Like, what was it like for you?
Um, hmm. I would say like sort of prior to coming out, I definitely did not realize. I think I knew that there was people in the world that sort of identified as LGBTQ. I don't think I realized the actual community aspect of it, and that there was like places that I could belong to, or groups that I could go to, or events that were happening, or even like parts of cities that are kind of where folks tend to congregate more, I guess, than others, right? So I didn't know any of that, and my impression sort of was pretty, I guess, like not necessarily negative, but there wasn't a lot of like hope and optimism in that. Like my sort of exposure to folks was very, very much along the lines of like Jerry Springer shows and sort of being the butt of a joke, or that kind of character in a show that doesn't get taken seriously. So it wasn't like a positive thing. It definitely wasn't. It didn't look promising to me, like, oh, this is something someone I'd want to identify as. It was definitely like, probably don't want to be that person, because clearly like people just make fun of them, or they're the ones that are they're not ending up in these like, successful places, or where they want to be. So
and we're gonna get into this more, but I have a cousin Charlie who is a transgender male, and for him, I know the importance of having a community was huge in helping to navigate this transitional time, and just having people to be able to relate to. It's kind of similar to the AAPI community, in that sense of like cultural background. You have someone who can relate to your experiences. So I'm sure, or I don't want to assume, but not knowing there was a community out there was probably pretty daunting. And I'd like to think that getting to know that community was a big help for you.
Yeah, I think human connection, like in whatever way you identify, whether we're talking about being a trans person, or just being Japanese American, or being a part of any group, like I think connection is so important. So yeah, right. It's like without that piece of it, it really does feel like pretty isolating.
And Marsha, same question for you. From your perspective, as a young adult, what was the LGBTQ plus landscape like?
Well, I think for me, like my husband's a hairdresser. And so we had gay people that worked for his salon, because he owned his own business. So from that perspective, I knew people that were gay or lesbian, but I didn't know anyone that identified as transgender. And it just seemed like it was kind of out there, but not really close, even though those people worked for my husband. It wasn't like family or good friends. So in the beginning, I think, even when Aiden was really young, I knew that he was a little bit different. And so for me, I just kind of avoided, I avoided, thinking about it. I just thought, oh, he's going to change. When he gets to be middle school, he's going to be different. So I think from my perspective, I knew some people, but it was kind of out there. And I knew my child might be, because Aiden was assigned female at birth, so he might be lesbian, but I just kind of hoped that he wouldn't be, because I didn't think the world would be kind to him.
Aiden, I hope it's okay, but do you mind explaining, like, because we haven't even addressed it head on yet, but how do you identify within the LGBTQ plus community?
Sure. So I identify as a trans man. Yeah. Yeah. I was like, is it more complicated than that? Not really. No.
No. And that's the thing. It's some people try to make it more complicated than it is, but that's a whole other issue that we don't need to get into, because that's politics. That's
Right.
lack of humanity. But so Aiden, when you realized, or I mean, maybe not realized, but candidly, what was the process of coming out like for you, and who did you tell first, and when did you find the vocabulary to to not realize but to understand your identity?
We're talking about specifically coming out, like for when I came out as trans, though, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Because I'm like, I have two different two different stories. So I mean, the coming out process for me when I came out as trans was sort of a slow, I feel like, because I think I knew sooner than I wanted to admit to myself, because I had come out in high school and identified as a lesbian. And then I felt like, no, like, I don't need to come out again. Like, I know who I am and we don't need to do that all. And then there was this part of me that also felt like there's a lot of misinformation or a misconception about people like changing their minds or going through phases. And so I felt like, oh, see, if I like tell people that I'm not a lesbian and then I'm trans, like that just proves, whoever believes that that's a case, which I don't feel that way now, but and that part of my process, that's what I felt like. And so it took me a couple years, obviously, to kind of accept who I was and then start that process. And from there, it kind of happened. I didn't really have a good plan, but I ended up telling my mom sort of spontaneously, accidentally, kind of. We were at an event. I was playing for a LGBTQ like marching band for a little bit. And we went to like a parade and it was really hot and we went to go eat after. And at that point in time, I had been binding my chest. So I was like really uncomfortable too, because it was such a hot day, but it was a good day overall. And then my mom went to go eat and I was kind of in a probably not the best mood. I was a little grumpy. And my mom basically was kind of just like, why, like, what's your problem? Like, why, we had this great day. Why are you like in this mood? And I don't think that was actually why I was in a bad mood. I was just like hot and tired and hungry. But what came out was that like, I want, that I didn't identify as a lesbian, that I wanted to transition. And then it was, kind of like, well, you can't like reverse and go back. Like I couldn't take it back. It came out of my mouth. And we had a discussion about that, and kind of tried to then kind of game plan for how I would tell the rest of my family, because she basically is the only person I told like with words out of my mouth. Everybody else got a letter. And so that process then took some time. I took the time to write something that I felt like really explained, who I was, why this was important to me, what I hoped that their response would be. And then I was able to like pass that out to everybody, include not just family, but include like people I worked with, people that were close to us that I wanted to know,
So actually, I didn't even know there were two parts of your story. I didn't know you first came out as lesbian and then as a trans man. So I think that does add an interesting layer. And, was just like generally, was one more difficult than the other, or was it kind of just different?
Yeah, I wouldn't say one was necessarily harder than the other. They were very different. And I think part of it was just age. So I was like 15 when I came out the first time. And so, of course, like just being in high school, being a teenager, I just think that added a layer of difficulty that wasn't there when I was 20, almost 21, where I was able to, I think I understood a little bit more about who I was. And I also then had access to a lot more resources that I could get to on my own because I was an adult and could drive myself places and do some of that, I think, like soul searching that I might have had to ask for, like, hey, can you take me to something, drive me somewhere? That layer got removed, but they're just very different, I think, given just the context and the time.
Mm-hmm. And for you, and like, but specifically for you, Aiden, and but also for the listeners, I want to say that if I am using any of the wrong vocabulary, I'm sorry, because I don't know if like asking about two different coming out stories was inappropriate. But just for you, I hope you know I am sorry if I overstep or use any incorrect vocabulary. Please call me out if I do.
All right, for sure. But you're good. No,
Okay,
totally fine.
cool. And then Marsha, I know in another interview you did say that this process was scary for you as well. I mean, Aiden as the one experiencing it, there's tons of different emotions, but as the mom, you know, can you explain where your fear came from?
I mean, I think as a mother, you just want your child to be happy, find love, and be successful. And so when Aiden came out, I thought, oh my gosh, how is all of this going to play out in his future? And Aiden was bullied and harassed in high school. Really, yeah, it was really terrible. And he even experienced physical abuse. You know, people verbally bullying and harassing him, but you know, he even had just a couple of incidences where he was coming out of a place, he had gotten something to drink, and somebody just hit him, you know, those kinds of things. So I had a lot of fear, not just about the future, but knowing what had happened to him and thinking about the future. So when he came out as lesbian, yeah, there were incidences. So I was afraid. And then when he came out as transgender, I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be even worse. You know, I had even more fear. I had fear about restrooms. I just had fear because nobody really understood being transgender. And whenever other people are afraid, many times they will react in a way that is violent. So there was just a lot of fear just swirling around for me. And then, of course, I was just afraid if he transitions, if he, you know, goes on hormones, if he has surgeries, what does all that mean? So there were so many layers of fear for me. And I think that's why it was so important for me to find support, which I did through PFLAG. It's a national organization that has chapters, and because I could change the stories in our head. You know, we're talking about mental health. So this is like mental, like there were so many things going on. And so the more that I got information, it changed the stories that I was kind of playing in my head. And then I started to feel a lot less fearful. So that's why when Aiden and I speak to people, I tell them it's so important to get educated. It's so important to reach out for support. And that's why Changing Times and a podcast like this, I think are really valuable. Because in the beginning, I didn't know where to go. And then when I started to go to places that had resources for me, then I started to feel like, okay, maybe this isn't going to be as bad. Mm-hmm. My anxiety and my stress level and my feeling of overwhelm started to just get less.
Mm-hmm. So with that, kind of on the note of getting educated, I know you mentioned PFLAG, but where did you start in getting educated? Was it just Google? Did you have Aiden tell you what was going on, or did Aiden kind of let you navigate it? And then at what point in getting educated did you come across PFLAG?
So I think, especially when Aiden came out in the beginning for being a transgender individual, I relied a lot on him. I did go to the internet, but you know, a lot of times you don't know how reliable some of these sources are. So really, Aiden said, I want you to watch this video. And so I watched that video. And then in that video, there was a mother that was active in the local PFLAG chapter. So then I started to go to the PFLAG chapter meetings. I also got some books, read articles. There were some online parent groups of transgender children that I went to as well.
Hmm.
But the thing that was kind of interesting is there weren't a lot of Asian people. And from my experience and my background, it was different going to a place that had that didn't have the awareness about our culture, about our honor, about saving face, about not wanting to talk about things in private, in public that were so private, that kind of I grew up with that kind of feeling. I mean, even the idea of reaching out to therapists, I grew up with this whole concept, and I think this is a stigma in our community, that you don't go to people with your problems. You figure them out yourself, because that means you're not strong enough or wise enough to figure it out. And yet when this situation came up, I did not have any tools or any awareness or knowledge. So yeah, all of those places were really important for me, to really manage the journey and support Aiden.
And Aiden, so when you wrote, getting back to writing this letter and telling friends and family, what was the reaction to this? Was it, I'd like to think it was largely positive, but I'd like to hear it from you.
For sure. So I am probably of the rarer statistics of folks who have pretty much, like, I think the majority of our family, at least immediate family, was very supportive, has been continued to be supportive, and very active in like trying to learn and grow in their process of understanding. So I feel like that statistically is just not the case. So I'm definitely, I have the privilege of family acceptance and their support. And in terms of friends, I think I had lost a lot of friends in high school when I came out. So the people that were left after that, I think were, pretty solid individuals who, were my friends because of who I was, as a person already. And so the process then of coming out a second time, I think, is kind of like, okay, like, yeah, there's adjustments that have to be made now, right? We're changing names and we're changing pronouns. But that acceptance factor was already there from before. And so the people that I did end up telling who are my friends, continued to be so, just because I think that I had already whittled it down to like the ones that really the ones that mattered already.
Right.
Yeah.
We're taking a quick break to introduce Anchor, the sponsor of this podcast. Anchor is free, first and foremost, which is amazing. Who doesn't love free? And you can record everything directly into Anchor. It's so easy to use Anchor. That's how you are listening to this podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple, the Anchor website. You're listening to it because I uploaded this podcast episode to Anchor. If you want to start your own podcast, I highly recommend Anchor. It's made this whole process so easy. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Marsha, before I ask you about the reactions when you talk to people, Aiden, did you go to like a religious school or like, were you guys in a very conservative area? Because I don't know our age difference. I'm 23. But like, I feel like, we can't be that big of an age difference. And I
big age difference. I'll be 34 tomorrow.
Okay. So that is an age difference. And also happy birthday in advance. But I mean, that in the grand scheme of things, obviously, that's not like a huge time difference. I know, like, as of lately, like, the world has grown to be so much more progressive, but what was your environment like to have this type of reaction?
So I grew up in a pretty, when I say conservative, I guess I don't know politically conservative, but very heavily AAPI city. So like my high school was over 70%, AAPI folks, super academically driven. My high school was like, people go to the Ivy Leagues and stuff, and you're expected to do very well in your academics. And then I didn't go to a religious school, but I grew up going to a pretty conservative Lutheran church. And a lot of the friends that I had in school were also the friends that went to church with me. So because of that, I think is partly why like some folks weren't as accepting, is just because of that factor. And not all, but like there was definitely a lot of folks that I think sort of sided more with the religious aspect and the not acceptance from that lens. And so it kind of felt like the natural path, I guess, unfortunately for some of these folks.
Yeah, and it's that's I think even in some religious circles, like even that is as much of a factor in the LGBTQ plus community, because some religious groups are becoming more and more progressive in that sense. But for me, it's just difficult to imagine, because I feel like, again, I don't think it's a huge age difference where it's hard for me to, like, it feels like it's two different worlds, but it shouldn't. So it's just shocking to hear how much of a reaction there was.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of it is just lack of exposure. Like the high school students I work with now, I think just partly based on technology, like the access to things, like having the access to all these things on your phone, being able to access pretty much the whole internet, right? And then just the slow progress we've made in terms of teaching folks at a younger age about diversity and about these different aspects of people being human. I think that's what like is the difference, because I do still hear from folks who go to the high school, every so often I'll run into a student who goes there, and I think it's still not as great as it could be, but it's because that school is so academically focused over, I think, more of maybe that social aspect of things, that they're not as caught up. Maybe other places are, but I do think that there's a difference now, just given that like young folks have access to information and they're able to just kind of learn on their own. Definitely. Whereas like for me to get on the internet, I had to like dial up, my dad's like, get off the internet, people are trying to call the house, and I'm like, no one's calling the house, but that was like the only way I could get on the internet, right? And now it's like, pick up your phone, like my students are on there all the time, so it's like, I think that in itself has given them the ability to teach themselves, right, and to learn. So
yeah, and not to call you old, but the fact that you did do dial-up and I never did, that
it's old.
It is a sign of like the technology difference.
For sure. There's literally Instagram reel that is like, this is the sound that will differentiate two generations. That is how I feel.
Okay. So yeah, you're not old, but baby technology was old at the time. So I'll just leave it at that.
Fair. I'll take it.
And then Marsha, to get back to, this reaction of when you start to discuss Aiden with, your friends and family, what were their reactions? And, especially within the church, I'd love to hear about that. But overall, what were the reactions like?
Well, let's start with the church. I sensed that this church was not very progressive and not very inclusive. And so I actually stopped going to that church, but my kids had friends that were going to the church. And so I would take them to church and I would sit in the car and wait for them. And then, when they were done, they would come out. But Aiden, I can't remember how old you were, but a minister asked Aiden to leave and not come back to the church. And that was appalling to me. It really was. And actually it was very hurtful. But what I understand is that's not unusual for many of these evangelical and not progressive churches. So anyway, we left the church, and actually we have not really, there's so many nice, good churches around, and we visited. In fact, Sunday, Aiden and I spoke at a church virtually. Wow. We were their keynote speakers, and Aiden's done training in the Buddhist the Buddhist Churches of America. We've done a lot of work with the Japanese, the Nikkei churches like Centenary, West LA. So we know things are changing, but back then it was pretty hurtful. And so we really stood back from many of the churches at that time. As far as family, like I was pretty sure our family would embrace Aiden, but there's always that 1%, right? You just don't know what people are thinking. And Aiden, of course, decided once he came out to me as trans, and I said, you need to talk to your father, you need to talk to your brother. Well, he put letters, you know, computer, television, where he knew that his father and his brother would pick them up. And I didn't have very much doubt about them, but family, I wasn't sure. And this was in December. So Aiden decided that all of our Christmas events, he was going to pass out these letters. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is the best idea, but that was his plan. And I decided that I was just going to support him. So there were like, I don't know how many dinners, right? With my college friends, with work friends, with our extended families, both of our extended families, and then at work. So this was like a big deal for the month of December. And I tell you, on top of all the stress for Christmas, for Aiden to pick this, I thought, well, no, this could really send me over the edge. But it was amazing. All of them would get up, they would hug him, they would say, it doesn't matter, Aiden, we still love you. I mean, really, it was the best gift that I could have received from my family and friends. There were only 2 situations that were not that way. One was a very religious family, and we are not really very close to them anymore because the father tried to tell Aiden, I don't, you know, he is, I'm not privy to all the details, but all I know was this person was not supportive of Aiden. And so I was not gonna be supportive of him. And then we had another family that had a young child, and we were very close to them. And so they actually said, you know, we're not comfortable. And so we had a couple of talks with them, and eventually they came around. We came up with solutions on how they could be comfortable, and I could feel that I was supporting Aiden. So we're still friends with them and very close to them.
And I feel like it was slightly complicated, and they explained why. I think it wasn't that they didn't accept me. There was complication because they had already been correcting their child because the kid already thought I was a boy. And then because I was, very masculine presenting. And so they're telling this young boy that like, no, like that's, that's not, at the time, like she's not a boy, that's it, but then now they were going to have to go back and say,
right.
Well, actually, and so it's like, it was more like, how do you facilitate that? Because it's confusing now for the kid, only because the kid was like, I don't get it already. Like,
right.
Assuming I was a boy just based on how I dressed. So it was like complicated because of that. Not, I think, because they didn't necessarily accept me, but the more like, how are they going to handle that as a parent now with their child?
Gotcha.
And they were also a little bit afraid because being trans was such a new subject. And they were afraid that this young child could be influenced. And, what if he decided he wanted to be a girl? Which, if you knew this child, there was no way that this child would ever consider being a girl. He was really a man's man. So, a lot of times you don't know, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, it's not that it's not a big deal, but we just didn't know, and they didn't know. But I think anything, we talked it out, and they even said to me, we love Aiden, we just want to figure out how to be comfortable with all of this. And we worked it out, which I think if more people did that,
Right.
still could be a little bit better, right?
That was the direction I was like. I was as you were speaking, I was kind of like, I was kind of scolding because I was worried that the direction was, we're worried about them, our son being exposed to that, to being the idea of being transgender. And I understand that this was some time ago, so it's a little bit different. But this, now, like that's kind of like that's a pretty big no-no to be saying something like that. To be like, oh, we don't want to expose our child to someone who's transgender or the transgender community because we don't want them to go down that road, as if like it's just like you could just decide one day it's a decision. And like same with like anything in the LGBTQ plus community, like it's just like, oh, like it's going to influence like our family. But I'm sure if that conversation were to happen today, that their vocabulary would have been more advanced just because of how much more open it is now, especially if they came around to it. So I had to remember, like, I can't judge this family. This was some time ago.
Yes, it was.
They ultimately came around there. So I regret making a face as you were describing it.
To be fair, though, that is right. What a lot of the legislation that's happening around the country is based on, though, is the idea of like kids are too young. We can't tell kids about this. It's going to make them gay or it's going to make them trans. And it's like, I watched Disney movies as a child with a prince and a princess and didn't make me, any one way or another, right? Like it just was a movie. Yeah.
Right.
So, but that is right. What that idea or mentality or fear is what is triggering a lot of these, or like starting this sort of momentum like with this legislation. So it's still an issue, right?
Which is insane in this day and age, because you would like to think we're making steps forward in intersectionality and diversity, whether it be racial or identity of any sort, or whatever it might be. And it's unfortunate to see this nationwide and even global steps backwards that are being taken. And while we could get in this rabbit hole of despair of where things seem to be going, instead I would love to hear more about where this starts to become your movement of Okaeri, and when Okaeri was originated, and what made you decide to create this initiative, and what were your beginning steps that you took?
Yeah, I guess I'll start, Aiden, and then you can add, whatever your thoughts are. Basically, I'm the founder of Okaeri, and I wanted to have a space like for families to accept their children, because as Aiden and I went around the country and we talked to people, it just broke my heart when Asian kids would come up and say my parent won't accept me, and just tears just running down their face. And they see Aiden and I together, and I just didn't think it was that unusual. I mean, I thought it was hard, but not that unusual, because you're a mother, you love your child. So I could just see that more resources and support and information needed to be out there. So I thought, well, let's start something with the Japanese American community. And basically I talked to people around the community, especially Bill Watanabe, and he encouraged me. Bill, I'm sure, Changing Tides is LTSC, and Okaeri is fiscally sponsored, and Bill was a former executive director a while ago. When he said, why don't you do a conference? I thought, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Let's see, what happens. I'm sure that's how Changing Tides kind of got started. Somebody said, I think mental health is really important. But I wanted a place where Aiden went and he could be seen as Japanese. He could be seen as LGBTQ. because really the work that we were doing before Okaeri, when he went to an LGBTQ space, there were hardly any API people. And when we went to API spaces, there wasn't a lot of talk about LGBTQ. And he had some specific experiences, maybe he can talk about it, where people would kind of say things to him from the Japanese community. You want to tell him about that basketball incident where that lady came up, that Obachan came up to you, Aiden?
So long. Well, and that was prior to my transition. But again, I was, if you imagine, I was pretty much as masculine as I could be without having transitioned. So, and how I dressed and presented myself, and the build of my body and my hairstyle and all of that. And my brother played basketball out of the local temple, and there was like a fundraiser dinner, I think, something like that. And all the families kind of come to help out, and I was helping to clean up, plates and dishes. And there was this nice Japanese grandma with me, and we were like pushing a cart and taking plates and dishes and trash, and kind of in this very like sweet way, which took me a while to process, like, and really understand what she was saying. Was just kind of like, like really good Japanese daughters, and this is not a verbatim thing, but like, really good Japanese daughters, like they kind of don't draw attention to their family, like, they try to blend in kind of a thing. And I was like, oh, okay, like not really getting it. And then later I was like, what the heck? Mm-hmm. Like, wait a second, was she talking about, like, she was talking about me, like how I dress, and how like that could make people talk about my family because of who I am. Like by default, now I'm bringing them into this like sort of whole thing, and I was probably only 16 or 17, so I didn't get it until like it took me a little bit to process that. But yeah, so that like, I don't know, experience, I guess, around finding not specifically even Japanese American folks, but like other, I think, AAPI people who are also part of the LGBTQ community felt like foreign, like that was not a thing.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, my cousin Charlie, he doesn't have an AAPI LGBTQ plus support system. At least to my, as far as I know, everyone I've met of his amazing support system, and he has an amazing support system, none of them are AAPI, because as you both have touched on, it is such a foreign thing to discuss or address, especially back then. It's opening up more now, of course, but even just 3 years ago, probably not. And something that I'm curious about, because this is something that my dad and I experienced, because my dad and I, we've spoken on behalf of Changing Tides from a father and son perspective on mental health as two people who have depression. And I'd like to hear from both of you about, how does it feel when you both are, it might feel relatively ordinary to have the relationship that you do, but how does it feel to like know, or at least to be told that you're, this isn't a common thing in the AAPI community for an Asian mother to be accepting of their trans son. So for both of you, how does it feel to like be able to have a platform for what is just maybe a regular relationship between the two of you?
Aiden, do you want to start?
I was gonna let you start. How does it feel? Okay, I'll start. I'll start. I mean, I guess I feel like it's hard for me to like even conceptualize what it would be if it was different, only because it really would be just like speculation for me. I mean, I can definitely say like, right, if I didn't have the support, I definitely know my own experience and outcome would have been vastly different, right? But yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting because also at this point, like we've met a lot of other parent-child AAPI, like LGBTQ queer families, and so I'm like, oh no, we know like other parents and
Right.
children that have this relationship, but I'm trying to think back to like when we didn't, when it was like we were the only Asian face when we'd go to an event, because it really wasn't like something that folks were talking about within our communities. And so I think it's allowed us to have, I mean, for me, it's a very humbling experience, and also to be really like to kind of go back to a place of like gratitude and really understanding that like this is still not the case, right, for a lot of folks whose intersections are similar to my own. And so, you know, it's I very much am aware, I think, of that dynamic and how it could be different. But then also now realizing like how far we've come, right, and that there are these other families we know and have gotten to do work with, and so that the movement is actually happening, right? We're actually making progress forward.
Very well said.
Yeah, that was well said. And I kind of lost the question, man.
For no worries. And just really quick, Aiden, when people talk about me and my dad's relationship, I'm like the same exact way. I'm like, this is just kind of what it is. Like, it's funny you guys are think it's so special, but this is just me and my dad. Like, we fight in the background when we're not talking in front of people. But uh, Marsha, to get back to the question, how does it feel when you're given this platform or to have a conference where the both of you are speaking on this relationship between the two of you that might feel so normal to the two of you, but is really special in the eyes of a listener? So how does it feel to like have that platform to just discuss your relationship?
Yeah, I feel um, so honored and grateful. Um, I was just talking to my best friend today, and I said, I'm going on this podcast. We're talking about mental health, Aiden and I. And she goes, oh, you are? Yeah, I said, yes. And I said, I'm just so grateful to have that experience with Aiden. How many parents, and I'm sure it's the same thing with you. Is your father Jeff?
Yeah.
Aiden, Jeff, you were on that panel with Jeff, remember?
I mean,
So
I do. Oh, at the one that you didn't go to, that you were
Yeah,
supposed to.
when I hurt my back, and
Yes.
then you were with another father, and I think another like a therapist, and Jeff is Matthew's father, right?
Yes, yes. And
Oh.
that's funny because I was away at college at the time. So that's
Oh,
why I didn't meet either of you there either. And I
oh,
wasn't even really, I was kind of helping with changing tides, but not so much. So like I wasn't even like, yeah, I was, if I was even there, I would have been in the background. But yeah, Jeff is my dad. He was,
Oh,
yeah.
cool. Right on. Okay. Like I like this full circle experience now.
yes, yes.
I mean, we know the AAPI community, especially in SoCal. We all know each other somehow, even before you know that you know each other. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, but Marsha, to get back to,
Yeah, to get back to it, so I was talking to my best friend, and I was telling her I'm doing this podcast, and I said, what a privilege it is to be with Aiden, to talk about things that families rarely talk about, to hear the stories, to hear Aiden's story, for him to hear. And she goes, well, he can hear your story too. And I said, well, yeah, that's true. How many times do we have these moments where we can really be authentic and connect, and Aiden will be open about stories, and I'll be open about stories. So for me, I just feel so privileged and honored to be in the same space with him. I think that people will say on a pretty regular basis, it's so interesting. I can just feel the love between you and your son. And I think it's a privilege for us to be able to be that authentic so people feel that way. And people have said to me, I really want to have that kind of relationship with my child. I want to be able to talk about things. I want to be open. I want to have this feeling that we trust each other. And like for me, I not only trust Aiden and love him, but I absolutely respect him. I think he is just an amazing person. And I get to tell him that in a podcast like this. And I get to have this interaction where, we just tell each other the truth. We had a situation recently, and, he told his younger brother, Stefan said, Aiden, should I do this or should I not do that? And he says, what did mama say? And he said, well, mama says I don't have to be there. And he says, you know what? I just trust that our mother will ask if she needs it. And if she doesn't need us, then that's okay too. But to have that kind of relationship with your children, they say they trust you in that way. Oh my gosh, I think it's just amazing. So very fortunate, just like you, I'm sure, Matthew, you feel very fortunate to have that relationship with your father.
And see, that's where Aiden and I are kind of in the same boat. I acknowledge how lucky I am to have this relationship, but it's just what it is now. So it's like my dad has the benefit of having the relationship he had with his dad, and of course they were close, but like the discussions around mental health and openness probably wasn't the same as what I have with him. So this is the only experience I've had with a father because I don't have kids. So it's like this is just like what life is for me. So I acknowledge how grateful I am. That's why I'm glad that I'm not the only one that feels that way. And Aiden, you can relate to that because I know how great it is, but it just feels so normal. And kind of in the same vein, I want to ask Marsha. I'll start with asking you: has Okaeri, if it has at all, has Okaeri changed the dynamic of your relationship? Has it strengthened it, or again, like is it kind of like what me and Aiden were saying? Like it's just kind of still the normal relationship?
I mean, I think it feels normal, but it has to have strengthened it. And I just feel that, like Aiden, like he talks about gratitude, and he'll say little things to me about being grateful. And I think, in this big stage, of Okaeri, I just remember him going on the stage and saying Tadaima. And then I went on the stage and I said, Okaeri, Aiden. And I think Okaeri has created this space for us where he feels like he can be at home. And I feel like I'm building a home, not just for him, but for the community. Because I just want people to feel that our Nikkei community is going to be a welcoming place. And it's not, we still have a lot of ways to go. We did a survey and only 30% felt like the Nikkei community was welcoming. So there's another 70% that, we're trying to bring along. So as much as I feel I've given to them, they've given back to me and to Aiden as well, I think. So I just love this work that we're doing. And I love the ability that we have to partner with other organizations in the Little Tokyo area. Just like the Buddhist churches and Changing Tides, we can't do all that work. But if we can partner with organizations that will help us, it's going to just break through some of those barriers so that families will seek help, and reach out.
Then Aiden, same question to you. How has this program, if at all, changed your relationship?
So I feel more like our relationships stay the same. See, it's funny is for me, it's changed my relationship more I think the community as a whole. So like, I feel like, and maybe it has like, strengthened our relationship, but I feel like because we do work in other capacities together too, that happens on its own sort of outside of Okaeri, like for me, what Okaeri did was change my relationship with being Japanese American and a trans person, and that those two can exist in the same room and be affirmed with a bunch of other people who also have these intersections. And so it changed the sort of the relationship I have with myself and those identities, but as well as like being able to be in a community space that's filled with other folks too.
Mm-hmm. So I did have a question that I know I sent you the questions in advance, but I wanted to ask about, you know, how has the discussion around the community, the transgender community, changed? But I think you both already nailed that, like, through this discussion. But I guess to kind of make it more specific about not just the overall discussion around the transgender community, but, you know, are there any moments that stand out as like very meaningful in the work that you do? Like, is there a specific moment that comes to mind that's like, oh, this is what I'll remember from Okaeri as like, we made a big difference to this person or to this group?
I'll go ahead and start. At one of the conferences, one of the people, well, this person was like in his 50s and came to our conference. And he said that he walked around and he saw people that looked like his family that were loving their children. And so he decided, even at his age and being kind of nervous, to come out to his family. And, you know, when you're 50 years old and you've lived your life a certain way, to really be that courageous to do that, that was so meaningful to me. And his family accepted him, and he said it was kind of a surprise, but it was like he just felt so grateful. And, you know, I felt grateful that we created a space where he could do that he felt he could do that. And, you know, if his family didn't accept him, I hope that he felt Okaeri would be a place that he could come back to for support. So I think it's, you know, on many levels, there's been so many moments that I think Okaeri, is really a valuable space.
And then Aiden, same question to you. Is there a moment that stands out from any of these conferences or engagements with Okaeri?
I don't know if I have like a specific one. I really think for me, it was like the most powerful thing was to walk up onto a stage and look around a room and see folks like where like, because it was still, I mean, the event is technically open to anybody. So there were still like folks that didn't identify right as Japanese American in the room. And that's cool. And that's fine. But it was weird to be in the room with folks that was the majority, like to look around a room and see folks, that look like my family and look like myself. And then to know like what we were doing in that room, right? Like, we're not just hanging out in Little Tokyo. And it's, you know, in sort of a random way. It was like intentional, and that folks were there to either learn more and to be, you know, hopefully more informed and better allies and supporters, or they were there to continue building that community. And that was kind of for me, like every time I've gone, that's the experience, right, of getting to be in a room with folks. And for me, that's like probably the biggest takeaway.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think, you know, it doesn't have to be a specific moment. I think that's great that it's like when you're able to look around and see the impact, that's just as beautiful. So I know we're going a little bit longer than we anticipated. Are you both good on time?
Yeah.
We're good.
Okay. So before I ask some quick fire, like fun questions, I wanted to see if there's anything you'd like to say before we get to that from either you or both of you.
I mean, for me, I guess I just want people to know Okaeri is here, and if people need support or resources, we started out to be a Japanese American kind of focus, and now we're building resources in Japanese language. So yeah, I'm hoping that people will come to Okaeri to our events, and also know that we have a support group. We have one in English that meets the second Sunday of the month. And then we have 2 support groups in Japanese, one for parents and one for LGBTQ. So yeah, just know that we're here for the community. And if there's anything that people feel that we need to do, more of, if they would let us know, we're always open to new programming. And yeah, next year we hope to have an in-person conference. So hope people come to Okaeri 2023 and be in community with us.
Beautiful. Aiden, any final words or anything else that I didn't touch on? Nothing specific, but I appreciate the space and the conversation. I think that, aside of my like sort of identifying as a trans person, I also just feel like conversation around mental health and being, Japanese American or AAPI is also probably just about the same in terms of like how much folks are willing to talk about it or open to talking about it. And it's like you were saying earlier, it's like everyone experiences mental health, and it's not just this idea of like you have to be struggling with something like depression or anxiety. It's, everyone's experiencing something at some point in time. And so I feel like these conversations are important, and I feel like in the same way that it helps me to build community as a trans person with trans folks, I think the more we talk about mental health and just have these conversations, the more it's going to help other folks in their sort of journey and process. Yeah. And just to add on to that, I think that's why a lot of my questions are more so about your guys' story, because of the intersectionality you mentioned. I didn't want to ask like, how were you feeling with this? I want to know about what you were doing, No, I don't want to necessarily dive into, the depression and the anxiety, because that's all a part of your journey, and that's what I wanted to hear so much about, and what I know is meaningful to hear about. So I appreciate what you both have said, and I know this could be the most stressful part for people, so I'm sorry, but the quick fire round is just fun little questions.
I'm so excited for this part.
People get stressed out over this. I think it's fun. Yeah. Marsha, I'm sorry. That's why we'll start with having Aiden answer, and then you can. Yeah, we'll have you answer the question after. Okay. But the first question is, what is your favorite place to travel?
I'm the biggest fan of Portland, Oregon.
Wow. Okay. Can I ask what you love so much about it? If there's a specific thing or just things?
I'm gonna be honest. When I was a kid, this is maybe more information than you wanted now, but when I was young and first coming out, I thought I have to go to San Francisco because that's where all the gay people are in San Francisco.
Right.
I was 15. Was like, I'm moving there one day. And then we traveled to Seattle at some point, and I was like, forget San Francisco. I love Seattle. Pacific Northwest is for me. And then years later, we went to Portland for a conference, and I was like, forget Seattle. This is where I need to be. And it's like something about the vibe of the city. I love the weather. It's like one of the only places I've ever traveled that I felt like, oh, this could be like home for me. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, I have a tattoo for Oregon on my arm.
Very cool.
Because of that. So it's just one of those places that immediately when I was there, I just felt at home. Mm-hmm. And so I just really love it. Not a specific reason why. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great.
And I love Sedona in Arizona, because it's spiritual and quiet, and
we probably haven't been there in like 20 years.
You know what? I love that place. I want to go back, but Papa just always wants to go to Las Vegas. So
I'll take you.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, it's on the record. I'm not cutting that out of this episode. You're taking her to
I will take her.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you,
Matthew. If she pays for the gas and the road trip snacks, I will drive you.
Yeah, I will do that.
That's all I require.
You can put that on the record too.
It's on the record. It's all here. You can't take it back. Next one. What is a skill you don't have but wish you had?
A skill that I don't have that I wish I had.
I can answer.
Oh, look it, she's ready.
I'm just terrible at technology. It scares me and it frustrates me. And so actually, Aiden helps me with that. He's my personal Geek Squad person. So.
We're getting there then. You're going to get there then.
No, I just pay
Okay.
to do it.
Okay.
A skill that I have. I wish I was like more organized. I try really hard. But it does not something that sticks with me.
Gotcha. Both noble skills. I always go with singing. That's always the one I would prefer.
You know, everybody can sing. It's just a matter of if you can sing well.
Then I wish I could sing well. Let's go with that. Marsha, this one maybe is a little bit not as silly and goofy, but a word of advice you would give to a parent with a child who is in the LGBTQ plus community that might be struggling with supporting that child.
My advice would be to reach out for support, find a PFLAG chapter, go to an Okaeri, support group meeting, find resources to educate yourself. And I think the most important thing is just to make sure that your child knows you love them.
Good. That's great. Aiden, similar question. What advice would you give to a young AAPI, young person in general who wants to come out but maybe is scared about what their parents or their family might think?
I would definitely say it's very similar, I feel like, but to try to build up like a support network outside of your family. And it's not to say that families, because I don't think families will support, but I think when you build a foundation and sort of a network of folks who are going to support you, just because I think sometimes like my parents were supportive, but they still needed to learn, right? So there's still a little bit of a delay. And so while that process is happening, then you have folks that you can turn to and rely on and lean on if you need that support.
It's great. As both of us are Little Tokyo programs, I'd love to hear what your favorite Little Tokyo restaurant is. Maybe not of all time, but maybe the one that's your favorite now, if that's easier.
Favorite restaurant? Well, I love Fugetsudo. And whenever I go down to Little Tokyo, I will buy the big box, like 20. And it's just my husband and me. But I freeze them so I can take them out one at a time. So if that's the kind of restaurant, I also like Suihiro's. We go there, they have this eggplant miso thing it's
really good.
Yeah, really delicious.
I don't know. I just like food, so this is problematic. Keepers is really good.
Okay.
I don't know if you've been, but
I have not.
Specifically like the breakfast lunch, like brunch, I guess maybe breakfast lunch brunch.
Okay, cool. To round it out, for both of you separately, what would the title of your autobiography be?
Well, we already have a book, Matthew, so I don't know. So I'm just going to go with the book that we've already written. Is that okay?
I was actually, to be honest, trying to hint at that. So if you guys could just give a shout out for your book, I'd love to hear about it right now.
So the title of our book would be Two Spirits, One Heart. And Aiden and I wrote that book together. It's from a mother's perspective, but there's so much of Aiden in there and we had to edit it together. So that would be the title of the book. And people will ask, how did you come up with that title? And it's because I think Aiden and I are two different spirits, mother and son. But it's called Two Spirits, One Heart, because I think both of us have been guided by love. And I think for any challenges, if you can come from the perspective of love, that's really the most important thing.
And then Aiden, do you happen to have an answer if you were to write an autobiography? Just to, we plugged your current book, but I'd also love to hear if you were to write an autobiography.
I have no idea what I would do. I feel like I would probably make the mistake of trying to be funny, and then it wouldn't be fun. Like no one would get it. And it would just be terrible. But I don't even have something in mind. It just would be. Yeah.
We could just call it like. Do you want to just try to throw one out or no?
I don't know.
What about?
Oh, you have one. You have one for me.
Well, I have one for you because whenever we do our book signing, how do you sign it?
Oh, I just put Love and Revolution to Love and Revolution.
Oh.
Well, there you go. I think that's an amazing title.
Oh, I think so too.
I could probably someone probably already has a book called that. I just write it because I feel like that's, what we're doing.
Well, I'm sure there's a cookbook that's called The Hunger Games, so I don't think you have to worry about two books having the same title. You can just go for it. Don't take my word. That's not legal advice. But thank you both so much for coming on the podcast. Again, I've loved talking to both of you in person at our different events, but to really hear about your story, it's beautiful, and to know you deeper in that way, it's been great. Yeah, I don't know what else I could say other than thank you so much for the time, and I look forward to running into you both at the next time we're both in this common space.
Great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you so much to Marsha and Aiden for joining me on the podcast to discuss their mental health journeys, Okaeri, their journey, or Aiden's journey in transitioning, how Marsha supported him. And it was just great to talk to them. I've met them at multiple events before. It's always great to talk to them. So if you enjoy this episode, you can subscribe to our show for episodes that release on every other Tuesday, and give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. If you would like to support our podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or check out our website, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tides on mental health. We